Welcome to our final session based on materials from Green Christian. My name's Imogen Nay.
And my name's Andy Griffiths, and this time we're departing a little bit from the radical presence material, and we've called this week Both and.
People of Israel for about 70 years, they were exiled from Jerusalem. They were refugees, and we meet them. They're back in Jerusalem, and some of the younger generation are rebuilding the temple. And it's a great example of the both and theme. So it's reading from Ezra 1 and 3. Could I have a volunteer?
I'm happy to read. If I can pronounce the name at the beginning of the.
Don't worry about that.
Thank you.
Make it up.
Make it up. The God of heaven has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has appointed me to build a temple for him at Jerusalem in Judah. Any of his people among you may go up to Jerusalem in Judah and build the temple of the Lord, the God of Israel, the God who lives in Jerusalem, and may their God be with them. Joshua and his fellow priests and Zerubbabel and his associates began to build the altar of the God of Israel, to sacrifice burnt offerings on it, in accordance with what is written in the law of Moses, the man of God. Despite their fear of the peoples around them, they built the altar on its foundation and sacrificed burnt offerings on it to the Lord, both the morning and evening sacrifices. They began to offer burnt offerings to the Lord, though the foundation of the Lord's temple had not yet been laid. When the builders finished laying the foundation of the temple of the Lord, the priests in their vestments and with trumpets, and the Levites, the sons of Asaph, with cymbals, took their places to praise the Lord, as prescribed by David, king of Israel. With boldness and thanksgiving, they sang to the Lord. He is good. His love toward Israel endures forever. And all the people gave the great shout of praise to the Lord, because the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid. But many of the older priests and Levites and family heads, who had seen the former large temple, wept aloud when they saw the foundation of this smaller temple being laid, while many others shouted for joy. No one could distinguish the sound of the shouts of joy from the sound of weeping, because the people made so much noise, and the sound was heard far away.
Thank you very much indeed, Phil. So we're talking about both and. So we were thinking maybe we could look at this passage of the Bible, and maybe we can see ways, various different ways, that two contradictory things are happening in the passage.
The older generation don't like the fact that the older building's coming down, and the newer generation are really pleased. So you've got, it seems to me, two ages, as it were, generations. People lamenting the past going, and other people rejoicing in the newness, which are probably is a kind of condition of being which goes through our church and goes through lots of things in terms of society.
Yeah. And do you think that's all the more true where there's traumatic stuff happening, that there's a particular likelihood that the old and young will have different experiences of it, as in this case?
Yeah, I don't think it neatly goes into old and young, because some old people want new things as well, and some young people want to cling on to the old. So I think it's, it's more complex than just the age versus the young. But I think there is something in that. And I think it becomes more dramatic perhaps at a time of problems, of conflict and worry.
see the top of the.
Can you bring the document down a bit, Andy? Yeah, lovely. Thank you.
I think this is also to do with, it's not just about the building, is it? It's about sweeping in with the new and sweeping out with the old, giving a fresh start. You know, it's not just a building. It's what's going to happen, and it's announcing the coming, and you know, be ready for it. We're going to start afresh. It's kind of the way I'm reading it.
Yeah.
Is it also just because the older people have longer memories, so they have the experience of exile? I read it as they have mixed emotions because they've been through the sorrow of exile and they remember what was before. So that adds just a deeper level of sort of complexity of feeling for them. Whereas perhaps that younger generation, they're in Jerusalem, they don't remember the destruction. So it's all just about the now and what they can do now.
Everything's new and exciting for the youngsters. You know, this is a new beginning for them because they've got nothing, they've got no baggage to bring with them. And there's an oddity about the role of Cyrus in this, that he, as you know, declares himself, the God of heaven has given me all the kingdoms of the earth and appointed me to build a temple for him at Jerusalem. You know, whose temple is it? Is it the temple of the people of Israel? Is it Cyrus's temple? That's a very interesting thing. And Cyrus is actually claiming quite a lot of stuff that you know, that may be true in a political sense, but perhaps you know, in the eyes of the people of Israel, might have been seen a bit, you know, over the top in his view of himself. So it's a question of working out, you know, how God uses possibly unlikely allies as well, which is an interesting matter to discuss in itself. That actually, who you work with, you know, may not necessarily be the people who you think you may work with, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't work with them.
Yeah, and certainly at the end of this evening, we're going to come up with a declaration that will go, we hope, both to religious leaders and to civic leaders, that somehow we're dealing with both of them. Do you think Cyrus is a bit theologically confused?
Well, he's not of the faith, but he's become an ally of the faith, and you know, and become in a sense God's instrument, but without necessarily being a believer himself. And he is a bit confused about that, you know, trying to grapple with, well, I'm kind of who I am, but I'm doing what your God says I should do, and stuff. So
where does he think God is?
Well, that's an interesting point, Andy, because I was just looking at the very opening sentence. The God of heaven has given me all the kings of the earth. I mean, what is his view of God? Oh, somebody who just has a home or whatever in heaven and has a responsibility for heaven, but not the God of earth. Is there some confusion in his mind about what God is God of, or what? It's a rather interesting opening sentence there.
I think he almost sees like God as some sort of a divine chess player, really. You know, saying, "Well, yes, okay, here's your bit, yes, and you know, and then you do your bit, because you know." But he's kind of out, but he's there.
Yes,
and we're just the pawns and pieces, kind of thing.
But then later he said the God who lives in Jerusalem. So he's very confused.
Yes,
that's true.
But has he got a point a bit?
Yeah, he has. He's got a knowledge of theology that probably didn't know he had, actually. This dichotomy of God being transcendent and immanent, you know, is clearly there at that moment for him.
Because I think there are those who feel like they don't have access to God because God lives in certain religious buildings, and that's unfortunate. But on the other hand, actually Cyrus has got a point that there are particular places where God has chosen regularly to be found, it appears, or am I wrong? He does seem to be trying to hold together in his mind this everywhere God with this in particular places God. And maybe we've discovered some more about those aspects of God in lockdown. What do you think?
There's a further bit of confusion, certainly in my mind, because is he saying that there are several gods? Because there's a God of Israel, then there's a God in Jerusalem, and made their God. So not only is he naming places where he believes or he's suggesting God is, but is he by definition suggesting that there are several different gods? And if that's in his mind, how can that be? Theologically, that is nonsensical. I'm not suggesting he's nonsensical, but it reads in a strange way. Yes.
And in a sense, that's the thing that we've been struggling with as a nation, in terms of, we feel like God habitually showed up in our church buildings. So when we weren't allowed to be in them, it challenged some of our theology. Was this a legitimate experience of exile, or did we need to revise or revisit our incarnational theology?
And where do you think we are at the end of all this? Or we're not at the end, are we? But at this point in the process, where do you think we are on that?
I think I'm slightly, and had the conversation earlier today, I think we're a bit troubled at the moment, because I get concerns that when we start to come out of where we are at the moment, that people will say, well, the church wasn't there during the lockdown, during the period I was here, in the way I would have expected it to, and I managed without them, so why do I need them now going forward? Which is why I've shouted before, and I made the point at lunchtime today, that we need to be at the front. Church needs to come out first and be leading in some way. We've got to do something fairly radical to draw attention to ourselves. Otherwise, we're likely to lose people rather than gain people.
But I'd say that other people have found an experience of church in a virtual sense that maybe that they didn't have when it was maybe more tied to buildings.
I agree with you to a certain extent. I mean, the group that I've got, we've certainly become closer as a group, but it's a limited group, and it's not the whole church. It's a limited number of people that kind of all know each other now, and obviously a thing like Zoom is very, very good for that and keeping things going. It's not the same as being with, doing all the things you normally do within the church. It's just not quite the same, is it, as being with people. And when I see a real person, I'm out for a walk and I see a real person that I know from the church, it's like a moment of sheer bliss and gladness. I can't hug them or do anything, but I can wave to them and say hello.
Well, perhaps, I don't know, perhaps all of what has happened in terms of access to buildings puts that much greater sense of urgency on what we are as a church, that it's not just a collection of buildings, but it is, literally the body of Jesus Christ. And maybe it's a wake-up call. We are the church. The buildings will come and they'll go and they'll be changed and they'll fall down and there'll be a cost. But the church is the people, and in a sense, we've got to respond to that. So worship, as we have known it, may be a thing very much of the past. There will be new ways of worshipping together, be it online or whatever, and there will always be a place, I'm sure, for the actual estate.
I've got to ask the question of this is if we weren't in the position of the virus at the moment, would we be having this conversation tonight? Would we all be here? I suspect we wouldn't. So it's lovely that we are, and this is I'm grateful for. Well, grateful doesn't sound like the right word, but I'm overwhelmed with it. Really, it's very, very nice having met so many nice people. So.
And there's a creativity, isn't there, in Ezra 3, that actually they're starting to worship before the foundations are laid. So they're not waiting till they've got a church building, a temple building in that time, before they start worshipping. They realize that, you know, Cyrus may have a point that God has chosen particular places to show God's self, but they're assuming that God is pretty flexible on the architecture.
I also think that that lovely phrase, no one could distinguish the sound of the shouts of joy from the sound of weeping. I would love it if when we go back to our churches, that could be true, that we could be a place of both lament and hope and joy, and being able to be wise enough to hold that space and not collapse that paradox, that we can be, even within ourselves, we can feel at the same moment great joy and great sadness. And I think if we could deepen our emotional language as a church, that would do an enormous value for us in our communities.
I think that's perhaps one of the things that's happened, you know, in experiencing the sort of regular cycle of morning and evening prayer in a way that perhaps didn't before. You know, looking at the language of the Psalms, which go through every human emotion, you know, and you do get these psalms of immense lament, but you also get huge outpourings of praise, and you know, and those laments are sometimes, you know, songs of the exile kind of thing. But at the same time, there are the exuberant songs of going up to the temple or whatever within the Psalms, and it's about that whole package that reflects our human experience, not just now but other times as well.
Yeah,
I agree that it's about the package, and that I think there are quite a few subtleties. So joy often depends on lament, and I think there are subtleties regarding the building as well, in that it's not an either or. It's not a solid transition from being outside the building to being inside, but we carry God within and without the building, and we carry his praises. So there are more subtleties, really, I think. I'm not putting it very well, but I just think when we have this passage in front of us, God said this after he'd said, the first time he ever said, I think was in Exodus, when he said, my dwelling will be with my people. So he was already saying he was with his people, as opposed to, or not just in the tabernacle. And yes, they still had a building in which the people could meet, but the people were still the people, and God was with them when they were outside the building. So there are lots of subtleties, really, I think.
If the Diocesan Advisory Committee could be aware of that. But I think that's a very valid point. I remember, I won't go back too much into my history, going to Taizé in the summer of 1971, and being part of a very large group of young people. And the Church of the Reconciliation there was too small to house everyone. So they just knocked down one of the walls and whacked on an enormous piece of tarpaulin, a tent. Just got on with it, because I think there was a recognition that that's where God was, and God, you know, was there to be worshipped by all and sundry. So I think hopefully that just resonates with the point there.